Hey, thanks for watching my video. If this video helped you out, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. So we're going to replace this just terrible brake system that Ducati thinks it's okay to put on its motorcycles. I am not a fan of most Ducati brake systems. I don't like having one line going down to one caliper and then another line going over to the other caliper. I'd rather have two separate braided brake lines going from the master cylinder down to each of the calipers. There's probably no difference in braking and stopping, but I personally think it looks a lot better. That brake line that goes over the fender just doesn't look right to me. It looks out of place. So the first thing we did was we sucked all the fluid out of the reservoir up top, and then we're going to suck the fluid out of the system itself, and we're going to do this from the bleeder valve, which is farthest away from the master cylinder. And if you watched my video, I did a video not too long ago when this bike appeared in my garage. The brake fluid was very dark in it. I swapped out the brake fluid. The owner of the bike, was looking over the bike in the garage after I had all the fluids changed, and he decided that he wanted black braided brake lines. So that's where we're at today. I ordered these brake lines from a eBay retailer, Podium Superbikes or Podium Cycles, something like that. They list a lot of Galfer brake lines on eBay, and it's usually usually the cheapest. I had to actually send a message out to them to see if they could get me black Galfers. It took me about a week longer, which they told me it was going to take 2 to 3 weeks for me to get the brake lines. But I'm going to say, instead of having my brake lines from them in like 2 or 3 days like I normally do, it was about a week, so it wasn't a long period of time. So I got my braided brake lines, and now I'm putting those on. This job should take you about a half hour start to finish. So I've drained the system, and I just removed the banjo bolt up at the master cylinder. And now we are going to start pulling the line down through the bike. Always start at the top and work your way down. And I'll tell you why. When you start at the bottom, any residual brake fluid that's in the line is going to end up being all over your bike as the cable swings while you're removing the top. So in the 1 or 2 brake line replacements that I've done in the last 35 years, it's just easier to start at the top and let the fluid just sit in the brake lines, and then when you're starting to work on the bottom, you just keep a paper towel handy to catch any fluid that might drip out of the banjo bolt as you're removing it. And behind this headlight, there is a little metal loop that the brake line will go through. So I'm having a little bit of difficulty getting that brake line through that little hoop. So once I've got it through, then I'm going to remove the Allen screw, which holds the little clamp that holds the brake line to the lower triple tree. And like I said before, work your way down on the brake system. It's just easier, and it's a lot less messier for you. So use my experience to help guide you in this process. It's easier to keep your garage floor clean going forward doing this install than to come back afterwards and have to clean your garage floor and get all the brake fluid off of it. So now that we've got that little clamp off here, now we're going to remove the banjo bolts from the right caliper. So the little cap that I just took off the bleeder valve, make sure you save that. Galfer does provide you with a little rubber cap for on top of your bleeder valve, but it is not as nice as the one that Ducati ships. So the one with the Ducati has, actually if the cap comes off, it'll still hang on to your bleeder nipple. I don't know how that cap would come off, but it's a better cap, the one that comes from Brembo. So we've got the right side off, and I'm just wiping any brake fluid that's on top of the caliper, and then we move over to the left side. And these banjo bolts are on very tight, so you are going to have to use a little bit of force to loosen them. And then you see I keep my shop towel close to the caliper and the banjo to catch any brake fluid that's going to come dripping out of the banjo before I can get the banjo bolt out of the caliper. If you keep your work area clean as you're working, you'll find it's a lot easier to do the job and keep the bike clean. The last thing you want to do is get any kind of brake fluid on a painted surface or an aluminum surface of your motorcycle. It doesn't do anything for the bike except damage it, and the last thing we want to do is damage our bike and get brake fluid stains on our motorcycle. And then ultimately it makes the bike harder to sell later on when you go to get rid of it. So always try to keep your bike as clean as possible. Alright, so we've almost got this banjo bolt off, and they are kind of awkward to work with. When I put the new banjo on, you'll see I put it on in a different direction, which I find makes it easier to bleed the system later on in life. So here's my Galfer kit. Any time that I rebuild the bike, I always use Galfer braided brake lines. I often like to do different colors. If this were my bike, I think I personally would put red brake lines on it, just because the bike is already black everywhere. I like to do things on a bike that makes my modifications kind of stand out a little bit. On the other side, I did put a red open clutch cover on the bike, so I think the red lines would help bring a little bit more attention to the bike, that the bike has some modifications. But that's just me. The owner of this bike likes everything black. I'm surprised he was okay with the red open clutch cover. So here's your new banjo bolt. Your banjo bolt is going to be the banjo bolt, a crush washer, the banjo, and then another crush washer. Always use new crush washers for your brake system. It's not as important if you're changing your oil to reuse the crush washer, but for your brake system, this is a little bit more important than your oil drain plug. So yeah, make sure you have a brand new banjo crush washer in there. It's just very important. Your life will depend on it. So notice I have the banjo with the bend close to the fork. So I do this on purpose, and the reason for it is it makes it so much easier when you go to bleed the brakes in the future. It's nice that banjo is out of the way. If you put it on the back edge of the caliper, then when you go to bleed in the future, not only do you have the fork in the way of your wrench, but then you have this banjo bolt, this 90-degree banjo bolt in the way of your wrench when you're trying to open the bleeder valve and bleed it. So I try to get as many obstacles out of the way when I'm putting the bike together to make it easier in the future for servicing it. The guy that owns this bike, he's been a friend for 10 years or so, and I've worked on a lot of his bikes. I've worked on other Ducatis he's had. I've worked on his R1s. So yeah, when you're doing work on somebody's bike and you know that they're going to be bringing their stuff back to you, even your own bike, make it easier on you. It's always better to work smarter than to work harder. So again, you see that the 90-degree bend of the banjo is leading towards the fork. And the only reason for that is to make servicing the brake fluid easier in the future. If you watch the beginning of the video, you'll see where it came from the factory. The banjo was at the back of the caliper, and all that did was made it a little bit more difficult to bleed the system later on. But again, it is your bike. If you like, fighting with too many obstacles in the way when you're working on your bike, then by all means, put the banjo with it going up in the back. It doesn't make a difference one way or the other. It's just I like to be able to get on a bike and work on it and get it done quickly instead of having to fight with obstacles. Alright, so both lines are now attached to each caliper, so I don't really care about the stickers that say left and right side and master. So we are ready to go. Now we just need to route these lines through that little loop. Like I told you in the beginning of the video, there's a metal loop that is attached to the upper triple tree, and we need to route these lines through there. It just keeps the lines out of the way and keeps the lines from bouncing off the frame when you're going down the highway. So there you have it. Both lines are now through that little loop. Here's your banjo bolt for up top. It is a 14mm. So this way is going to be banjo bolt, crush washer, banjo, crush washer, banjo, crush washer. Make sure that you have all three crush washers for this installation. It's very important. Your crush washer keeps the brake fluid from leaking out. And then once I line up my banjo bolt with the master cylinder, I can tell you there's no way that you're going to twist that in by hand. So I always use a socket, not a wrench. Just get a socket, and you want to turn this bolt just by hand, loosely, gently. This is a steel banjo bolt going into an aluminum master cylinder. So you don't want to strip the threads. You want it to go in smoothly, evenly, and take your time. And then once you have the banjo bolt in as tight as you can get it by hand, then and only then do you put a wrench on it and tighten it down. You never ever want to put a wrench on this and try to do this with the wrench from the start, because your chances of cross threading the bolt into the master cylinder are a lot greater. And I personally would rather not have you do that and not have to go out and buy a new master cylinder after you screw yours up. So heed my warning. Here we're just putting the little rubber little rubber band, I guess you'd call it, little rubber strap that holds the wires, the electrical wires, to the brake line. Originally, because there was only one brake line, the wires just went around that one brake line, and that's all I'm going to do here. I'm just going to wrap it around once. Later on, once I get the brakes all in place, I'm going to go ahead and put heated grips and shorty levers on this bike, and it's going to leave here with shorty levers. So here's the .4 that I'm using. It doesn't really matter what .4 you use, just use .4. If you start mixing fluids, you need to change the cap on top of your reservoir to let the next owner know that you've put something else in the bike. .4 is good enough. You're not going to be able to tell the difference if you start changing out and go with different brake fluids. The manufacturer did a lot of testing on this motorcycle to see that .4 brake fluid was going to stop the bike. So as long as you keep clean brake fluid in your brakes and your clutch, you'll be okay. .4 will be plenty for you. Even if you're racing it, .4 is going to be just plenty brake fluid for this bike. So there we go. We have the left side bled. So that looks pretty good there. I'm going to make sure that that bleeder valve is tight and closed, and it is. We're going to top off the reservoir before we jump on the right side. So you see how much room I have to move that wrench now with that banjo bolt going towards the front. I almost get a third of a turn to open that bleeder valve. So when you're pumping your Mighty Vac, you listen. What I do is I just listen, and then once I hear the air is no longer being sucked out of the line in the fluid, I can look up at the reservoir. I can see the fluid level dropping in the reservoir. Then you know that your caliper's pretty much bled. The air's out of it. So we have the calipers bled. Now we need to bleed the master cylinder. I'm not sure why Ducati decided to put a 11mm bleeder on the master, but you know, maybe Ducati wanted to be more like victory cycles, where you had to have your entire toolbox laying on the floor next to the bike when you're working on it. So always do your master cylinder last. You always start with the bleeder valve farthest away from the master cylinder, and then you work your way back towards the master cylinder with the master cylinder last to make sure all the air is out of the system from the bottom all the way to the top. So there you go. The system is bled. I'm going to take the fluid level up to almost to the top, to the high level. And then we're going to put our reservoir cap back on. And again, I just did this just weeks ago. I did another video of flushing the brake system on this particular bike. And when I was getting ready to hand it off to the customer, he decided that he wanted the black braided brake lines, shorty levers, and heated grips on it, which is okay, because I'm a big fan of this bike. This is one of those bikes I would enjoy owning myself. And you see the difference here in the caps. So this cap has a little ring that holds it onto the bleeder valve. So I like it better. I like the Brembo caps better than I do the caps that came with the Galfers. So just keep those caps that Galfer sent, keep those in your toolbox in case you ever lose one. You always want to keep your bleeder valves clean. And now we're going to put the little retaining clip back on the lower triple tree. And I'm going to hook this clip up like it was from the factory. I'm going to hook it to the one on the right side. And then I'm going to take a small zip tie and I'm going to zip tie the left side to the right side. And that'll keep my brake lines kind of organized behind the forks. So there you go. That's in there pretty tight. And now I have some small zip ties. You could use, bigger zip ties. There's not really a need. I just want to keep the bike looking as clean as possible. That's why I didn't use a ginormous zip tie on it. With a smaller zip tie, it's a little bit more hidden. But by all means, if you have a big wide zip tie, or even better, if you had any of those little rubber band clip things that Ducati puts on their motorcycles, if you have any of those sitting in your toolbox, that would work great on this as well. It would make it look more OEM. So when I put my zip tie on, I always turn the zip tie so the locking part of the zip tie is kind of hidden, so all you see is the strap. It just gives it a cleaner look, because really isn't what you want is people to walk over to your bike and take a look at it and think to themselves what a nice, clean, well-maintained bike you ride. So there you go. The brakes work. The brake lines look a lot better. I think this makes the bike look much better myself. The black brake lines do look good on it. However, I think I would have gone with red brake lines. I think blue brake lines would look good on the bike as well. And then we got rid of this nasty mess. So thanks for watching my video. Please hit the subscribe button. I'm often doing new videos on motorcycles, and I hope this helped you out.